the Bliss Business Podcast, the show about empathy, connection, and consciousness in business. Today's episode is brought to you by Zero Company, your paid search, social media, and programmatic ad experts.
Welcome back to the show. This episode is part of our Empathy Expansion Kit series. I'm Stephen Sakach here once again with Tullio Siragusa.
Hi, everyone.
Today, we quickly dive into empathy and leadership, how to incorporate empathy training into leadership development and sustain it in high-pressure environments. So some quick thoughts here. So companies with empathetic leaders often report higher employee satisfaction and lower turnover rates. Teams led by empathetic leaders tend to have higher productivity and creativity levels. And according to a 2021 study by DDI, empathy was rated as the most important leadership skills by employees. And that was 15,000 employees. And they said empathy and leadership was the most important skill. Tullio, I think sustaining empathy in these high pressure situations is the real key. That's when we're tested the most. And I think what's most helpful is starting with yourself and developing some self-awareness. For me, that starts with a meditation practice so that I'm not in my emotions, but I kind of see them as they arise. And I've said this before, those who are leading a team, they don't want to deal with your baggage, right? So work on yourself.
Leave it at home.
Yeah, leave it at home. But outside of meditation for leaders, where do the cracks get exposed and what areas of training should companies focus on?
Well, there are a few areas, but they're all rooted into the same thing. As you know, we've been doing an internal series about these 12 principles of what makes an authentic leader. And they're really tied to this idea of what is necessary to operate at a high emotional intelligence, which is necessary to be an empathetic leader. So there are a few things that will get exposed when someone's under pressure. When under pressure, perhaps instead of sort of stepping into the no problem context that a good leader usually does, they might start to see problems. They might start to push back. So that's a telltale sign that the empathy is being eroded. And then there's also a telltale sign that perhaps they're stepping out of a grace a little bit. So gratitude plays a big part in staying in that no problem context. And tied to that is being tied to some kind of a self-actualization system, which really is what activates wisdom for leaders. And all that is tied into something really critical. And this is something I've spent a lot of time studying, and that is the level of the individual self-worth. It is really a worldwide epidemic. It's the truest, biggest epidemic there is. This sort of roller coaster of just feeling good about yourself when things are going well and not feeling so good about yourself when things aren't going well. We're very externally directed. So as a leader, when you're under pressure, that is an externally directed situation. If that affects you, then the question is whether you have enough of a self-worth to realize and to separate yourself, to realize you shouldn't change who you are because of the external circumstances, right? They should not affect you. And I use the word should not because, that's realistically or aspirationally the way it should be. But the truth of the matter is we're human. So we carry all kinds of baggage with us. Whether we've treated it or done work around it, that's a different story. And so a leader who normally is empathetic is of service naturally. They have the level of humility in realizing I'm here to serve others. And it's not like a chore for them. It's a calling. It's a higher purpose calling in their life. That's who they are. They love to serve others, and it's part of the fabric of who they are. And that comes from a high sense of self-worth, right? You want to believe that you have something to give, to something to serve. And that also allows you to be very genuine, because people with high self-worth don't feel like they need to defend themselves or fight for themselves. They're not constantly looking over their shoulder. They're comfortable in their own skin. So that transcends into how they deal with other people. So they can deal with other people with respect, when someone perhaps has a different opinion than they do. And then most importantly, it's the ability to inspire the team to work together versus having to sell the team to work together. And there's a difference between pushing an agenda or selling an agenda, i.e., we're going to go through some changes. We got to go sell this to the team versus enrolling the team into the change. And the empathetic leader knows that you don't just do those things and push them down. You get the team involved and you get buy-in along the way so that they're actually contributing to that change. And that comes from, what we talk a great deal about, in this podcast, the whole purpose of bliss, build love into scalable system. So one of the key traits of an empathetic leader is that they're loving. They naturally are loving people, and they want to serve others because they have a love for people. And so the question is, what happens if you discover when you're under pressure that these aspirational things just kind of go out the window? And so you got to go through each one of these scenarios. Like, am I in the problem? Am I still in the problem context? What's causing me to be in problem context? Do I feel like my boundaries are being pushed? And if that's happening, is it tied to maybe some lower level of self-worth, which is tied to some insecurity? Is it putting into question perhaps my true willingness to serve? Is it really a calling for me? Is it just something I'm aspirationally doing? In which case, maybe you're not testing that enough, right? I always suggest if you have a tough time caring for people, go and volunteer. Do something where it's not about you at all. Just go out of your way, volunteer for a cause or something where you have to give of yourself and you got nothing to gain in return other than to have given. And if you're sort of that person who struggles and in this mindset, usually when you volunteer for a good cause, it'll snap you out of it because you realize how much people appreciate what you're giving and the impact you're having on people. And you're doing it completely out of service. And that activates more gratitude and ultimately more empathy. But those are it's very multidimensional. It's not just one thing,
Yeah, it's definitely multidimensional for sure. And I think, that you mentioned insecurity, and I think a lot of those, that really does play into the problem is, it's your self-worth. You see that. I see that with, just about anyone. You'll have that. Everyone's got some sort of insecurity about this and that. And sometimes people just lash out because of that insecurity. And that comes back to that self-worth kind of aspect. And so I think that's really key. That's a thread that I think is pretty common in there, is trying to develop programs, processes in your company that really help people with their self-worth, help them be authentic, be genuine. And then as leaders, we've talked about this before, like you mentioned, that having that service mindset. And then you said humbly serve, I think. And that's really the key in a lot of this, is that humility, because if you want to grow and if you want to keep going in the right direction with your company and your self-growth, you got to be humble, because everything is going to teach you the hard way if you aren't. So
I think the best thing people can look at is nature. Nature's a perfect example of being giving. It is in a constant state of giving, and it gives unto itself, and there's this interdependence, this dance that happens in nature. It is always giving and it always receiving at the same time. And no one's saying, oh, you should give me less, you should give more, or the sun should shine less today, because it just keeps going, right? So ultimately, it really comes down to understanding that when you serve others, you're also serving yourself. And this is where sometimes the struggle comes in terms of really being able to apply empathy a lot of time. It's understanding the basic principle that when you're serving others, you're serving yourself. It's not about how much you can take as it is how much can you give. And if you do that effectively, then the gift becomes the giving. So the receiving becomes the giving. And that's the context shift that is necessary for a leader to really tap into empathy all the time. Finding joy in the giving. That's the gift, is that joy in the giving. Not what you're going to get out of it or how they're going to react to you. It's the fact that you of service. That's the joy, that you get to be of service.
And like you said, go out there, volunteer, do things just so you can get some reps doing that, right? And feel it. So a few resources for growth in this area. There's a couple books to check out: Emotional Intelligence 2.0, another one, Dare to Lead by Brene Brown. There are online courses like Leading with Emotional Intelligence from Corsica, and Mindfulness and Resilience to Stress at Work. You could also go to LinkedIn. There's some learning there at LinkedIn Learning. Develop Your Emotional Intelligence is a good one, and Mindful Leadership courses, providing tools for integrating empathy into leadership. And if you want to dive deep into empathetic leadership, check out our lengthy discussion on empathetic leadership this season. It's episode 3. That's it for this episode of the Empathy Expansion Kit series, and we'll see you next time on the Bliss Business Podcast.